The wind howled across the open plains like a lonely ghost, dragging with it the scent of snow and pine. The winter was creeping in faster than anyone expected, and the little town of Sagebrush Hollow was already shutting its doors early, lamps flickering behind frosted windows. Out there, about 5 miles north of town, stood a lonely ranch, long fences of worn cedar, a stable that had seen better days, and a cabin built by hands that never asked for help. Inside that cabin lived a man folks around town called Eli Carter, a cowboy with eyes like storm clouds and a silence heavier than snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of weariness that didn't come from work, but from loss. He wasn't the type to waste words, and for the last 5 years, he hadn't wasted a single one on any woman who tried to steal a glance. They said he'd once been engaged to a girl named Clara May before she ran off with a trader heading west. Since then, Eli had built fences higher than his cattle gates, both around his land and his heart. Every ranch girl, widow, and waitress had tried her luck at melting that cold front, but Eli refused every one of them. He wasn't cruel, just quiet. Polite enough to tip his hat, but never long enough to let anyone see his eyes. Folks joked he was married to the mountains, but behind the jokes was a truth. No one really knew what kept him out there alone. The snow began to fall heavy that night, blanketing the world in silence. Eli stood by the window, a mug of black coffee in his rough hands, staring out at the endless white. The fire cracked behind him, shadows dancing across his face. He wasn't lonely, at least that's what he told himself. He just liked peace. He liked the sound of nothing. The world had taken too much from him already. He had no intention of giving it another piece. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The next morning, he rode into town on his horse, Dusty, to get supplies before the snow trapped him in. The streets were nearly empty, but he could feel eyes on him. They always watched, whispering behind half-frozen smiles. He tied his horse, pushed open the door to the general store, and nodded to the old owner, Mrs. Langley. "Well, look who the storm dragged in," she said with a grin. "I was starting to think you'd gone feral out there, Eli." He smirked faintly. "Just need flour, lamp oil, and coffee beans," he said. Mrs. Langley reached for the shelves, still talking. "You sure you don't want to pick up something warm for Christmas dinner? You can't live off black coffee and beef jerky forever." He didn't answer. He just placed coins on the counter, enough for what he needed. And that's when she walked in. The door creaked open, the bell above it chiming softly. A rush of cold air swept through, carrying the scent of rain and wood smoke. Eli didn't look up at first. He wasn't interested. But something about the silence that followed made him glance. She was tall for a woman, with straw-blonde hair pulled under a dark hat and a long brown coat dusted with snow. Her eyes were green, not bright like spring, but deep like pine needles. She looked around the store like she'd stepped into a different world. Mrs. Langley smiled. "Can I help you, miss?" The woman took off her gloves, her voice calm but firm. "I'm looking for work. Any chores, repairs, or stables that need cleaning. I can cook, too." Eli's hand froze mid-reach. A woman looking for ranch work. That wasn't something you saw every day. Mrs. Langley frowned softly. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, ma'am," she said. "Just passing through. Heard there might be work in these parts." Mrs. Langley sighed. "Most ranches are buttoned up for winter, dear. Not much going on except snow and silence." The woman smiled faintly. "I've handled worse." Eli didn't say a word. He grabbed his bag, turned to leave, but before he could step out, Mrs. Langley said, "Wait a minute. Maybe Eli here could use a hand. He's got the biggest spread north of town." He stopped cold. The woman turned, her gaze meeting his. "You need help, Cowboy?" Her tone wasn't desperate. It was direct, calm, confident. That alone was enough to throw him off balance. Most women batted lashes or smiled too much. This one just asked. He cleared his throat. "No, I manage fine." Mrs. Langley clicked her tongue. "Manage fine, my foot. You can't mend all them fences before the next freeze. Let her help you for a few days." Eli hesitated, then said quietly, "Ain't no place on my ranch for strays." The woman stepped closer, eyes steady. "Then think of me as hired help, not a stray." Her words hung in the air like frost on glass. She wasn't smiling, she was serious. Eli adjusted his hat. "Fine, you want work? You'll learn it." Mrs. Langley grinned. "There now, settle that. What's your name, dear?" The woman looked at Eli as if she was only answering him. "Name's June Harper." That's how it began. She showed up the next morning before sunrise, standing at the edge of his property with a small satchel and a look that said she didn't plan on leaving any time soon. Eli thought she'd quit after one day. The cold, the chores, the silence. But she didn't. She split firewood, fixed fence lines, and even outworked him some days. At night they sat by the fire, quiet. The crackle of flames, the only conversation between them. Then slowly something started to shift. He noticed how she hummed when she worked. Soft little tunes that got caught in the wind. He noticed how she looked at the land, not with the cold stare of someone surviving, but with the calm of someone healing. And he hated that he noticed. "Why'd you come here, June?" he asked one evening. She shrugged. "Guess I was tired of running." "From what?" "From everything," she said softly. "From people who wanted me to be someone I wasn't. From promises that didn't mean anything once the snow fell." He understood that more than he wanted to admit. Over the next few days, the storms grew worse. They were snowed in together, the cabin buried under white silence. One night, when the wind screamed outside, the lamp went out. Eli got up to relight it, but June's voice stopped him. "You ever get tired of being alone, Eli?" she asked. He froze, flint in hand. "I ain't alone. I got the land." She laughed, soft, but it carried something warm. "Land don't talk back, cowboy. Don't look at you when you're quiet. You want a wife, or just a winter alone?" Her words hit harder than any wind outside. He turned to her, her face lit faintly by the firelight. Calm, steady, fearless. She wasn't teasing him. She was challenging him. He didn't answer. Couldn't, because for the first time in years, someone had seen straight through the walls he'd built. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, something had begun to melt. The storm raged for 3 straight days. Wind clawed at the windows, and the drifts rose high enough to bury the fence posts. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, flickering shadows across 2 faces that didn't know how to say what needed saying. Eli worked silently, chopping wood, feeding the horse, checking the roof, while June stayed close to the fire, sewing a torn sleeve, humming that same quiet tune. They barely spoke, yet something had changed since that night she asked her question. "You want a wife or just a winter alone?" Those words had buried themselves deep inside him, stirring things he'd long forgotten. By the 4th morning, the storm eased. The world outside was clean, endless white. Eli stepped out onto the porch, breathing in air so cold it burned his lungs. Behind him, the door creaked. June stepped out, her coat pulled tight, blonde hair catching the early light. "Beautiful," she whispered. He nodded. "Cold kind of beautiful." She smiled. "Some things are meant to be felt, not fixed." He looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't fragile like the town women. Her hands were rough, her boots muddy, but her eyes, they were alive. He realized he'd been staring too long when she met his gaze with a grin. "You keep looking at me like that, cowboy, and I might start thinking you like me." He turned away, muttering, "Don't flatter yourself." She laughed, the sound sharp against the frozen morning. "You're a hard man to read, Eli Carter. I ain't a book worth reading." "Maybe," she said softly, "but I've always liked difficult stories." The days passed slower after the storm. They worked side by side, feeding stock, clearing snow, repairing the roof. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but every silence between them started to feel less empty. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she found an old photo on the mantel, a young woman with dark curls, smiling beside Eli. "Clara May?" June asked quietly. He froze where he stood. "You've been snooping?" "Just looking." He walked over, took the frame from her hand and stared at it. She left. "That's all there is to it." June studied him. "You ever wonder why?" He sighed, setting the picture down. "No point wondering on ghosts." She wanted something more than this life. "I couldn't give it." June folded her arms. "And so you just stopped living, huh?" His eyes met hers, sharp, tired, raw. What do you know about stopping? She held his stare. Enough. I lost someone too. Difference is, I didn't build a cage around myself afterward. For a moment, the only sound was the fire popping. Then Eli said quietly, "Sometimes a cage feels safer than the open sky." "Maybe," June whispered. "But you can't breathe in one forever." That night, neither of them slept much. June sat by the fire, sewing quietly, while Eli stared at the flames, thoughts spinning like snowflakes. He wanted to tell her how her words cut through him, how every day she was breaking down walls he didn't even know were still standing. But he didn't. Cowboys didn't talk about feelings, they survived them. The next morning, the sky cleared, blue as spring water. The snow had begun to melt, trickling down the hillside. It felt like the world itself was waking up. June packed her small satchel, her voice light. "Well, looks like the roads will open soon. I should head toward the next town before the thaw floods the valley." Eli froze. "You leaving?" She smiled faintly. "Wasn't planning on staying forever." He tried to sound indifferent. "Guess you got what you came for." She paused, her eyes softening. "Maybe not everything." He wanted to stop her, but pride wrapped tight around his chest. So he just said, "Safe travels, June Harper." She stepped close enough for him to feel her warmth. "You keep fixing fences, cowboy, and one day you'll realize not all of them need mending." Then she turned, walked to her horse, and rode away through the melting snow. Days passed. The ranch felt emptier than before, the silence heavier. He tried to work it off, but every fence post reminded him of her hands. Every song the wind carried reminded him of her laugh. He caught himself setting an extra cup on the table more than once. And that's when he knew she'd gotten under his skin in a way no one else ever had. One night, a week later, as another storm rolled in, he heard hooves outside. He grabbed his rifle and opened the door. And there she was, soaked, shivering, eyes wild. "June?" She looked up at him. "Stage broke down. Figured I'd rather freeze here than in a ditch." Without a word, he pulled her inside, shut the door, and handed her a blanket. The silence stretched until she finally whispered, "You didn't think I'd come back, did you?" He shook his head slowly. "Didn't think I deserved it." June stepped closer. "Eli, you don't earn love by deserving it. You earn it by not running from it." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, the walls fell. He reached out, brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek, and whispered, "I don't want another winter alone." Her smile was small but steady. "Then stop refusing every woman who tries to warm your heart." He chuckled, rough and quiet. "Ain't every woman, just one." The fire burned late that night. Two shadows sat close together, the sound of wind fading against the window. Outside, the last snowflakes drifted to the earth like secrets finally told. When the sun rose the next morning, the mountains gleamed gold, and for the first time in years, Eli Carter didn't feel alone.